The age-old rules of war have been shattered. When Russia launched one of the most horrifying attacks yet, targeting Ukrainian children, the backlash was swift, severe, and unmistakably personal. Just hours after the strike, the US moved to lift key restrictions on Ukraine. In that instant, British and French missiles were unleashed, striking deep across Russian territory, hitting refineries and military factories that President Putin cannot easily defend. And the retribution didn't stop there. The United States imposed crippling sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, two of Russia's largest oil companies. Russia's stock market is plummeting and Putin is furious. But he has only himself to blame. By targeting Ukraine's children, he forced the West's hand. The time for dialogue has ended. The moment war became personal has arrived. It all began yesterday morning, when Russia carried out one of the darkest acts of this conflict. At 10:30 a.m. Ukrainian time, Russian drones struck a kindergarten in broad daylight. It happened in the middle of a school day. There is footage of the strike and of the rescue operation that followed, first responders rushing in, children being evacuated amid chaos. You can hear kids crying out for their mothers. Russia denies the attack, branding it a NATO setup and dismissing it as a fabricated plot. But we present the evidence. You decide. According to Russian propaganda, this was revenge. So, what was Russia avenging? Earlier that morning, Ukrainian forces, using British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles, destroyed a Russian chemical plant in Bryansk. That facility was part of Russia's military-industrial complex, producing explosives, rocket fuel, combat charges, and more. Russia started the war, so Ukraine arguably had the right to strike it. Russia's response: target a kindergarten full of children. And yet the Kremlin claims the victims are all actors, and the site was in fact a NATO facility. But one thing Putin overlooked: though he may have lost all compassion, the world still holds some. And notably, the First Lady of the United States has shown deep concern for Ukrainian children. Just a few months ago, in July, President Trump publicly revealed that his wife, Melania, had convinced him that Putin's promises couldn't be trusted. When Putin visited Alaska, Melania delivered a personal letter to him, asking that Ukrainian children be protected, a plea the Russian military evidently ignored, given reports of Ukrainian children being abducted and taken to Russia for adoptions. What Russia did yesterday crossed the line. So here's a question for you, watching this now. When a war attacks children, does the conflict stop being one between armies and become one between civilians and monsters? Pause for a moment and consider that. Because shortly after the strike, the Wall Street Journal reported that the United States had lifted key restrictions on Ukraine's use of European long-range missiles. This move coincides with pressure from President Trump to drive Moscow into negotiations. But the devil is in the detail. The US didn't explicitly grant permission for missile strikes inside Russia. Ukraine already had that. What changed was the approval process. European missiles, British or French, used targeting data supplied by the US previously. Ukraine had to request approval via US channels, ultimately up to Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defense, before they could strike. Now that power shifts to General Alexis Greenwich, the top US general in Europe and current NATO commander. In practice, this means the US stops micromanaging each strike. Europe and Ukraine now act more freely, though using US data. President Trump later claimed, "I gave Ukraine permission to shoot missiles deep into Russia." That is not what the report said. What it said is that the US lifted certain restrictions, a technical but important difference. Ukraine is using European missiles, not US ones. The US remains behind the scenes with targeting data. But that narrative suits Russia well. Russia uses half-truths all the time. Now the West is doing something similar, casting itself as the bystander while others hit Russia. It's a reflection of Russia's own playbook, now being turned back on them. And again, the retaliation didn't stop there. The biggest news, certainly, were the sanctions. The US announced brand new, very sharp sanctions, not just extensions of previous ones. Among those targeted, Rosneft and Lukoil, giant Russian energy companies, with Rosneft state-owned. Hitting them is hitting Putin's wallet directly. Some may ask, isn't Russia already the most sanctioned country in the world? How much worse can it get? Let me explain. These new sanctions aren't just on the parent companies, they apply to any entity they own 50% or more. Many subsidiaries and enablers are now exposed. On top of that, these companies can no longer transact in US dollars. That raises their costs and squeezes profits. Sanctions do not collapse economies overnight. Rather, they tighten a noose. One could say, the Russian economy is not dead, but it's finding it ever harder to breathe. What's more, the US urged its allies, the UK, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Canada, to join the campaign. On the same day, the EU adopted its 19th package of sanctions, targeting Russian energy, key banks, and the shadow fleet of tankers that Russia uses to ship oil to countries like India and China. We are witnessing a turning point. Russia's war, once cloaked in ambiguity and plausible deniability, has become overtly brutal. Children have become targets. The West's response, likewise, is no longer subtle. Missiles are flying, sanctions are tightening, accountability is rising. This is not the war of generals and tanks alone anymore. It is a war of infrastructure, of economics, of children and symbol victims. The message is clear: if you hit kids, you invite every tool at the world's disposal. From now on, every missile across Russian skies, every refinery disrupted, every oil company barred from Western capital, those are not incidental. They are part of the chain reaction set off when war becomes a moral reckoning. History will mark this. Russia's miscalculation has led to a firestorm bigger than any battlefield. Putin, isolated and cornered, can't point to anyone else. The West is unified in response, with determination, not just for victory but for justice. In the days ahead, watch for more shifts. The targeting lines may blur further, alliances may shift, and the rules by which war is fought may change. For now, one thing stands out: when children are struck in their classrooms, the world cannot stand by. And when the world responds, the war starts moving into new dimensions: economic, strategic, moral.